Hello, welcome to How to Build a Sustainable Music Career and Collect All Revenue Streams. I'm your host, author Emily White. Today, in theory, we're supposed to dig in on Chapter 4, How to Record With or Without a Budget. But similar to the Image and Heap episode, I can't resist asking today's guest certainly more than that. So I'm so thrilled to welcome Patrick Sansone to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here, Pat.
Well, it's great to be here. When you ask me to do something, I tend to say yes. So glad to be here.
Well, I really appreciate that. So I'm going to take you through the book a little bit, or rather kind of your career through the lens of the book, if that makes sense. It's not anything to be intimidated by any means.
Okay.
And then we'll dig in a little bit further on the recording chapter, which I haven't really done yet. So I'm excited for that.
Great.
So first up, when did you start playing music? And, take us through your journey, from whatever age that was to all the incredible things you're doing now.
Oh, boy. Well, it's always a little, it's kind of a big question, or maybe a big answer, but the short answer is that I've kind of always played music, from from my earliest memories. I just grew up in a very musical family. So there's always music around. My grandmother on my father's side was a performer. When she was in her younger days, I never saw her perform, but she did a lot of performing when she was in her teens, 20s, 30s, and probably 40s. My father was a performer, not professionally, but he, around the time that I came along, he had sort of stopped performing, but started promoting, and he was a show promoter in our hometown. So I saw a lot of music because of his work with that. Legendary performers. I just grew up seeing, I got to see some of the greats at a very young age. Ray Charles, Tony Bennett, Roberta Flack, Gladys Knight. I mean,
unreal.
Many, many, many legends. And then my mother also was performing when I was growing up, and an incredible singer. So I just grew up in a family of performers and music lovers and appreciators of music and performance and creativity. So I was encouraged, not pushed into it, but just through example and through osmosis, just, encouraged to think of music and performing and culture as a essential part of life. So, as far as like me playing music, I started taking piano lessons when I was around 5 years old, I guess. Got my first acoustic guitar. I feel like it showed up in the house when I was about 10. Which I quickly took to, and unfortunately, the piano lessons kind of took a back seat. I just wanted to strum the guitar and learn Beatles songs, that's kind of when I first started playing an instrument, so it was just kind of always there, always a part of my world, always a part of my family, and that was kind of the origin of it.
I love that. So where did it go from there?
Well, I guess, the thing about where I grew up, Meridian, Mississippi, it's a small town. I think it's shrinking, but I think when I was growing up there, I want to say it was a town of about 50,000 people. And it had some, there's a musical heart to it. The sort of the man who's considered who is called the father of country music, Jimmie Rodgers, was from Meridian. There were some musicians from my hometown that kind of, sort of provided an example of, the possibility of getting out of Meridian and working in the music world, like a fellow named Chris Etheridge, who was the bass player for the Flying Burrito Brothers, and also played with lots of people, played with Willie Nelson, and played on lots of cool records in the 70s. Actually, I just recently was listening to one of my favorite albums by Gene Clark, who I'm a big fan of. And I was just looking at the credits just to see who the band was, and he was the bass player on this record that I've loved for years, and didn't know that Chris played on it. So that was kind of cool. He was a family friend, and a songwriter named Steve Forbert, who had a couple of hits in the late 70s, and is still a hardworking troubadour. He was from just a few blocks away from where I grew up. And there were some musicians from my hometown that had gotten involved in the Muscle Shoals recording scene in the late 60s and early 70s. So I would always hear about some of my parents' friends that were down there writing songs and recording. So Meridian had music. Even though it was a small town, it had musical things happening. It didn't have like a real, like a club scene, or I wouldn't say Meridian really had a music scene, but it had a musical heart. I guess is the way to put it. But when I was in my teens, I started working at this recording studio that was in our town. There was only one recording studio in the town. And when I was about 15 or so, I found myself in the studio with my band. I wouldn't say it was my band. I was playing keyboards in a band with some older kids. It was a heavy metal cover band.
Nice.
I was not into heavy metal, but I wanted to be playing some music, and I was friends with one of the younger brothers of one of the guys in this band, and they knew that I had a synthesizer, and they wanted a keyboard player in their band, so I kind of got pulled into it. And those were my first times, like, being in a practice room with other people and, learning songs. And, we played a few gigs around town. But the thing that it really opened up for me was that in order to be in a battle of the bands or something in our town, we had to make a demo. So we went to this recording studio, the one recording studio in town, and the owner of the studio saw that I had some talent, saw that I had a synthesizer, and asked me if I would be interested in helping him do some things at the studio, which of course I was. So I kind of spent my high school years working at that studio, recording jingles, local jingles, and being part of the studio band when, people would come through to do demos. There were a couple of people that came and made records there. And that's how I learned how to be in a recording studio and be comfortable in the studio, and I think those experiences in those days really kind of set the course for what I would end up kind of moving towards and record making, and even what I do now. Just the ability to work with lots of different kinds of people, different kinds of musicians, different styles of music, to be adaptable. Because we would we would work on, you know, country stuff and some rock and roll stuff and gospel. Some gospel bands came through there, and then we'd be doing commercial jingles. It was kind of all over the place, and so I think that adaptability, those lessons in adaptability, really have helped me, even to this day.
Definitely. What an amazing education to get at such a young age.
It really was. I of course, just being a young person and a teenager in a small town, no matter where it is, and you're frustrated and you want to, in my mind, I wanted to be anywhere but where I was. In my mind, I was wanting to be, in London in 1967. That's where I was in my dream world.
Yeah.
But, I came to realize later that it was a pretty special situation, getting to observe all those great performances from backstage, from watching, like watching a show happen from the opening of the box office in the morning through the sound check and the performance and cleaning up after at night and locking the doors to the theater at 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
I got to see all that at a really young age. And while simultaneously or in my teen years, just being able to look into what recording is and what making a track is, So by the time I got to the point where I was in my 20s and I was starting to write songs and I was starting to, be in bands that would get in the van and go around and play shows, and I had already kind of been around a lot of stuff. I'd already been around a lot of showbiz.
Yeah, totally.
Show making,
Mm-hmm.
And also was just comfortable with the idea of making recordings, I think, that both of those experiences were very unique and super valuable.
Absolutely. So you made the jump or the natural evolution from that incredible experience as a young person to, playing with bands. Were you playing with bands locally, or how did your music start to come together?
Well, even when I was living in Meridian, even though, I didn't really have peers in Meridian that were into the same kind of music that I was at that time, that also were musicians. There was a very small community of us in Meridian in the mid '80s that were listening to what at that time was called underground music. Later called indie music. Just bands, under the radar, like on the underground college rock scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I was also really into a lot of '60s music, and that's what I wanted to play. But there just weren't other musicians in town at that time that were my age and were into that. So I felt kind of isolated in that regard. But I was starting to, write a few things here and there. A friend of mine had a 4-track cassette recorder that I borrowed and a few times, and did my first attempts at recording my own music. But I started traveling over to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which was a college town. So there was a college scene there, liberal arts college, or a university with a lot of liberal arts programs. So that's, there were a lot of creative kids there, and that's where the music scene was. And there was also a music scene happening up in Starkville, Mississippi, which was also college town, and New Orleans was 3 hours away, and Jackson, Mississippi, the capital, had kind of a cool punk rock / new wave club. That once I caught wind of that, started sneaking over there and sneaking into shows, and started to get a view of this Southern music underground scene that was happening, and that was super exciting, for me, because I was like, okay, yes, there are others like me. There are others, doing incredible stuff, that it was just super encouraging, to know that it was possible. And REM had a lot to do with that too, because, REM were on the rise, and they were kind of the heroes for us. They were for all of us Southern, weirdos that wanted to make interesting music. They were like our Beatles, the fact that they were from Athens, Georgia, and they were, from a small college town, and they were doing this super interesting creative music, and it was getting attention around the world, was, they were sort of flying the flag for us. So those were the years that I really started meeting other, people my age, and I met some guys from Laurel, Mississippi, that had a band that I really liked, and I joined their band as the second guitar player. And then on our second show, the singer-songwriter quit.
Right.
So the rest of us carried on, and we wrote some songs. At that point, I could have access to the studio in Meridian on the weekends or at night, and so we made a little cassette, 10-song cassette, and that's how that started. And through that music scene, is how I ended up, meeting, that's how I met John Stewart, who I later formed the Autumn Defense with, and then, he's the reason that I joined Wilco.
Absolutely. That background is all incredible, though. Like from your childhood, all those different bands, you definitely put the work in. That's for sure.
Well, it was, I don't think I ever really, considered doing anything else. I did end up going to college in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I went for one semester up north in Amherst, Massachusetts, another great, college music scene. But there was a moment there where I was kind of weighing either going the academic way, maybe being a professor. My degree was not in music. My degree was in philosophy.
Cool.
Super practical.
No, I think that's awesome.
And so yeah, it was the only other thing I could sort of imagine doing was maybe going the academic route and sort of living in that world.
Right.
But at the end of the day, rock and roll won out, as I really knew that it would.
Amazing. So the first chapter is called Get Your Art Together. And what I mean by that is I do feel that anyone can have a career in the modern music industry, but the music has to be amazing. I guess by anyone, I mean, pretty much anyone with access to a laptop and the internet can now record and distribute, right? But the music has to be great, for it to stand out in general, let alone when there's so much music out there. And, I'm sure you get these emails too. I get emails from artists all the time, with their music, wanting my feedback, but they almost always say, but I need to work on my vocals, or I need a new drummer. And I'm thinking like, well, then do that. Well, first, like, who cares about my feedback? Because I like what I like. And I feel that, like I said, any artist can build a career for the long term if the art is great. I've never been the type of person that's like seeking out like hits.
Yeah.
I'm seeking out like consistency. And again, like if I love the music, then I feel like it's going to connect with someone else and you can build a fan base from there. So I guess my point is, when do you know or in a production role, it could be another artist, when do you think you or someone is like ripe or ready to record? Like, when do you know that instead of like forcing it or feeling like you have to?
That's a really big question, I think you're ready to record when you think you're ready to record,
Right.
I mean, the tools are there, now. I'm just thinking about myself as a teenager. I was in a very, unique position in that, I was spending all that time in the recording studio. Now, granted, it took several years for me to get up the confidence, or even just the confidence in anything I was actually doing to ask for the keys to the place, to get in and record anything. So that took me several years. And back then, whereas now it's GarageBand. I mean, back in the 80s, it was having access to a 4-track cassette recorder, if you knew somebody that had one, or you could get one. And I kind of think of it sort of like, it's kind of like photographs. It's like, we can so easily delete a picture of ourselves that we don't like now. It's like, whereas before digital, the digital world was our world, you wouldn't be as likely, I mean, you might, but you wouldn't be as likely to just tear up a photograph and throw it away if you didn't just love the way you looked in it. And then 10 years later, 15, 20 years later, you look back at it and think, you're glad that you have it, and you think you look great. You're like, I wish I looked like that now, So I think the thing is it's a hard balance between not being too precious and not overthinking, but also putting care into what you're doing.
Yeah.
And there's no real easy answer to that. I mean, I think I don't feel like there's any reason now where if you're a creative young artist, that you shouldn't just record,
right,
and see where that takes you, I could use some of my own advice because, I'm about to release some music soon that I recorded 20 something years ago that I, never let out of my, tight grip. And I wish, and for some reason it took me 20 something years to be able to do it, but I feel like it's the time. And I have to let it out of my grip, just for personal reasons. So I wish it hadn't have taken me that long.
Yeah.
So I guess my feeling is, if you can allow yourself the freedom to not get in your own way, and let yourself be heard and be vulnerable, even if you think something's not perfect, then that's only going to inform the next steps, that you take. If you're just always waiting for it to be just right, sometimes that can take forever.
Yeah. Overthinking is something that I think affects many of us. I had the privilege of interviewing Justin Vernon for this podcast, and I'm sure you know this, but he was grinding it out for years in bands, just trying so hard, wanting it so badly. And he talked about when he made that first Bon Iver record, that was because he just gave up,
Right. Right. Well, that's the thing. It's the letting go,
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's the having no choice, and not caring, so much about it falling into all the right boxes,
Yes.
because it's never going to, you don't know what boxes it's going to fill, sometimes,
Correct.
you can be surprised, so
Absolutely.
I hope that kind of answers your question.
Perfectly, because I think that people tend to skip ahead to the next steps or the future chapters, and I don't know if that comes out of insecurity or where that's coming from, because I would think the fun part is making music, but I just think I keep using the word think. It's the overthinking, right? And then we can get in our own way.
Yeah, for sure. And especially now when everything is so shareable so quickly.
Yes.
And not only so shareable so quickly, but judged so quickly,
Yep.
So yeah, I mean that's a real thing. I mean, it's the opinions come fast and strong, and these days, so that can be tough for a sensitive, creative person. I mean, if you're creative and sensitive, that's there's no avoiding it. I mean, that's part of the formula here. But the other great thing too is there's just there's so many ways for people to stumble across music now, and the ability to find a community has never it's never been. I feel like it's never been more accessible.
Right.
And, I mean, finding that community now is very different than it was. The hoops you'd have to jump through to find your community back when I was a teenager. Or in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Not that one carries any more weight or is any more profound than the other, but it's just knowing that it is possible to find your community now just by making your work and getting it out there. That's got to provide some comfort to young artists.
Absolutely. And that is a good segue into chapter 2, which is not as I don't know if sexy is the right word, but like creative as the first chapter. But I guess my question, so chapter 2 is pre-recording marketing foundation, email list, text message club, and social media. And so my point there is like, before you enter the studio, make sure those things are in place, because if you do want to communicate at some point, or as soon as, when the record's done, you want to have those things in place. So I think, well, I don't want to lead you too much, but how do you use social media?
Well, I mean, it's just my megaphone.
Yeah.
I, as I'm not the most skilled social media person. And I like to, I like to work with others that can help me in that regard. People that, people that have that, a little more in their toolbox. But I do, of course, I do use it. I mean, for things that I'm doing, for things my band, the Autumn Defense, does. I mean, and yeah, I mean, just I guess that's what I'm saying. Like, thank goodness it's there. Because at least if you're making something and it's yours, and you're not part of a machine, you're not part of you're not part of a label, you're not part of, you don't have a big team around you. You have the tools to get the word out. Um, this if you've been making your music on your computer, you have, the very same box that you've been using to make the music. You have the potential to broadcast that to the world. So, pretty powerful,
And it's cool to hear you say that, because again, you're not the type of person that's like, here I am, like me. I think it's so nice. Like, you're a photographer. Like I love seeing the world literally through your lens. And I think, well, I always think it's about authenticity and being yourself, but like, yeah, that's what it's all about. I mean, I'm like flashing back to Future Monarchs, who you produced, and everybody really should check out that music. It's so good. And, we did a deal with a little label in the UK, and they and I were trying to encourage the band to, just post something on social media. And they're like, well, we don't know what's, I'm like, and I remember Andrew in the UK from their label saying, like, post some photos around Chicago. I've never been there. I don't know what it's like. And I think to the guys in the band, I was just like, oh, whatever. I'm just doing my dog walking job, or, But Andrew had a really good point. Just as like, I want to know what's going on in the UK or whatever. So, yeah, I think you handle it. Again, it's all about being yourself, which you do exceptionally well.
Yeah, I think that's been my relationship with social media, is that I do struggle with it. I mean, because it is not my nature to put myself on display. Unless it's a situation like a show, like a performance, but I don't always want to be performing. And I think that is the struggle for a lot of creatives, and that some take to it extremely well and just can't wait, can't wait to be, on display. But a lot are not. Yeah. So just personally for me, I try to, just like you say, just be myself with it, not just like not forcing myself into particular places when I'm working on my creative things. I try not to do that when I'm talking about them, or promoting them. Just try, right. Just trying to be authentic, and and it's also about your goals too. It just depends on what your goals are with your creative work. Are you trying to have a hit? Are you trying to be the next sensation? Are you trying to get into millions of 16-year-olds feeds, or or are you just trying to make music that you yourself love and get it out there so that the people that might like it can find it? Those are two different impulses.
Absolutely. So moving on to also a not very sexy chapter title, or maybe it is, or creative, again, is probably the better word. Get your business affairs together.
That is super sexy. When
So
someone says that to me, that's
that's it.
That's it.
Exactly. But definitely what I'm getting at here, I mean, there's a lot in this chapter, but I'm just trying to preach like communication, nobody likes talking to one another. Nobody likes, talking about money. No one talks. So, tell me a little bit, how you handle songwriting splits, and again, you've been in all these bands, like, so it's like, when do you talk about this stuff? When do you talk about a band agree let me know any thoughts on stuff like that, if that makes sense.
Well, it is hard, and it's taken me a lot of, years to kind of like get, get comfortable with certain conversations. If I'm going into a production, if I'm producing someone, I just want to get the production agreement, get a production agreement with the terms, that we agree to, and how the financial stuff is going to be structured. Get that done before we step into the studio, because it just makes it easier, so that stuff isn't hanging over the project, and and there's not questions on the other end, or there's because feelings can get hurt if one entity is expecting something and the other then gets surprised, and that's a drag. I mean, I've been in that situation before.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, if you're an artist or you're a producer and you're going into a record making situation, a producer artist relationship, get that worked out before you even press record, for sure. And I've stumbled on that. I've gotten into some situations where I decided, oh, this will be cool, and then it ended up not being cool.
Yeah.
So I learned I have not followed my own advice on that and gotten burned by it.
Right.
So it just reinforces that's the way to go.
Definitely.
And songwriting splits that's a tough one sometimes, because that can take on so many different shapes. It just depends on the relationship between the two writers. I mean, I've certainly been in situations where I contributed something to a composition that I thought warranted, songwriting, being credited as a writer, and then it didn't happen, and which was frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also been in situations where I added, I was working with an artist, and we were going into the studio the next day, and we were running the song together, the day before, and I just suggested a chord. I suggested a chord substitution at some point in the song. It was like, oh, if you made that a minor, that could be really hip, and it would help set this thing up here for the outro.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave me a third of the songwriting. because he just felt like it was, he just felt like it did something very important to the shape of the composition. So,
yeah.
Those are two kind of extremes. But just to illustrate that it can go so many different ways. And I wish I had a great answer for that question, because I don't. Because the other thing too is, like, if you're working on a session with someone, and like you get into, there's kind of a state of mind that if things are going well and things are creative and people just start throwing ideas around because you're in the spirit of it, you get kind of lifted up by this creative energy that's happening. You don't want to start thinking, okay, I've got a great idea here for this bridge, but I need to state, excuse me, I have a great idea for a bridge here, but I need to state that if this ends up getting used, I need, I need at least 15% of the songwriting, 15% of the public. I mean, you don't want to do that in that environment. That's an instant vibe killer, and plus that's just not where you are. That's not the state of mind that you're in at that moment.
Right.
So it can get tricky, and it's hard to, you don't want to start getting so cynical that you just stop putting ideas out there because you're afraid you're going to get burned,
Of course.
So I don't have a great answer to that one. If anybody does, please send me an email, give me some advice. But again, I think if you can muster if you can do it in a elegant way, it's best to have those conversations at the beginning,
Right. Yeah.
And I've started to do that with, there's been projects where I've just stated like, hey, especially as a producer, like, it's like, I want to be here to elevate your writing, your vision, your thing. But if we get into a situation where, there's a problem that just can't be solved, and I need to get in there, and I have an idea, to add something to a composition that will solve that problem, then we'll need to discuss songwriting. So I think that's kind of a good general umbrella way to at least approach the subject before you get into it. And that did happen with, like we were talking about Future Monarchs. That did happen with a Future Monarchs song where they had a song that just was missing a part. It just didn't have a bridge, and I wrote a bridge for it, and they liked it, and they didn't, and there were no issues. They had no problem in giving me credit for that. So that's the good way that it can go.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So now to the meat of this episode. Chapter 4 is recording with or without a budget. I actually wrote this chapter with Bobby Lord. He definitely,
cool.
Yeah, he wrote the foundation of it because I felt like he had the perfect mix of recording experience where he's worked with people like you and Brennan Benson that are totally world class. And then he's done stuff on his own, on the cheap, and so I felt like he really understood both of those worlds. And I understand this chapter, like he really wrote the foundation of it. And then I went in and kind of added my voice. But that was important to me.
Yeah.
So I think with this, like, I'll go through kind of some of the things Bobby talks about in here and maybe talk, obviously say whatever you want, or, with some of this stuff, like what is the, like any DIY advice you have, and then maybe advice you have if there is a budget, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, if there's lots of good gear out there, if you don't have a ton of money to spend, you don't have to spend, tens of thousands of dollars to get a decent recording setup at home. You can, if you have one decent microphone and a good, and a decent interface to get into your computer, then you're good. You can make a lot of music that way these days.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people doing that. There's a lot of music that we're probably hearing every day that is made exactly like that.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say he's smart, or he starts with just smartphone demos. He's like, we often forget we have a computer in our pockets.
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. And I don't. I know there are apps now where you can actually do. I think you can actually do multi-track recording on your phone. I'm
Yeah.
sure you can.
Yeah.
I've never used them, but I know people do. Oh yeah, I mean, and iPhone recordings can sound cool. Um, I mean, I know I've taken things from uh, voice memos that I've made on my iPhone and used them as the foundation for a track. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean that's been done on a bunch of Wilco tracks because Jeff does Jeff does a lot of put sketches down on his iPhone, and sometimes he just gets really attached to the way the guitar sounds on that on that recording, and just doesn't quite sound right. Replacing it with a in the studio with a proper quote unquote proper mic and proper equipment. So
Hmm.
it'll get imported into the session, and then we're playing along to that. So yeah, exactly. I mean, we have a lot of tools around us all the time now.
Yes. And I actually just pulled one out, and I think, I mean, I'm not trying to like pressure you or anything. I think you do like this brand as well. Isotope has a free multi-track recording app for iPhone and Android called Spire.
Oh well, there you go. Yeah, yeah. I have. Yeah, yeah. They make great stuff, and yeah, they have a standalone thing called Spire that I actually take with me out on the road um, when I'm out and about. So yeah, there's lots of ways to get your ideas flowing
Exactly.
without much money at all.
Yeah. It's wild. Um, so what are your thoughts on digital audio workstations or DAWs? I mean, obviously there's a range of options there. What do you use? Any thoughts on that?
I use Pro Tools. I'm a Pro Tools person. Um, I learned how to use Pro Tools about 20 years ago by necessity because I had a bunch of recordings that I had started in New Orleans, all recorded on tape, 2-inch tape, and I didn't have the studio shut down before I had done proper mixes, before I had really mixed the stuff and really kind of finished it. So I had this material that I needed to finish and mix. And so I had the tapes transferred into Pro Tools. This is back in the early days of Pro Tools when, um, you know, every town had one or two, you try to find the Pro Tools person,
Right.
who's the Pro Tools person in,
Totally.
in New York or in Nashville. But I knew a couple of Pro Tools people, so I got the tapes transferred in, and then I went to New York, and my buddy, great engineer Mike Napolitano, basically taught me how to use Pro Tools just by mixing that material, just every day for 2 or 3 weeks, just really digging in. And so I've used Pro Tools ever since, and um, I just haven't jumped into any of the other you know the other softwares. I don't know how to use Logic. I barely know how to use Ableton, but I know people that use Ableton that do incredible stuff. Obviously, like Michael from Wilco is an Ableton guy. Um, but I'm a Pro Tools person, and I love the Universal Audio stuff. Um,
Mhm.
you, I have a Universal at my. I'm sitting in my studio right now, so I'm looking at it. I have an Apollo 16, which is the brain of my studio. It's my interface, and I mean their plugins. Their plugins are just incredible. I I lean on them so heavily in my mix work, and I just think they do incredible stuff. Um, So yeah, that's kind of that's the center point of my studio. Um, but but that's just what I know. I kind of found with Pro Tools, I just found a tool that felt good to me that works that works for me and the way that I make music, the way that I make records. Um, it's certainly if I was working on other styles of music, I probably would, want to dive into things that are a little more geared towards programming and stuff. But the way I make records, Pro Tools is really, it works for me.
Very cool. What kind of headphones do you like? And obviously you have access to monitor speakers, but
yeah, we're getting into some specifics here.
Yes, Bobby did a good job. I learned a lot from this chapter in my own book.
Well, I'll just grab them. My headphones of choice that I really like are they're Shure headphones, the Shure SRH 840. I really like them because to my ears, they're pretty flat. They're not too hyped in the high end, which a lot of headphones seem to be these days. And I just have to be really careful with my ears because I do have some tinnitus, which I think a lot of musicians do, whether they want to admit it or not.
Right.
We're around a lot of, we're around a lot of loud and information, a lot of high end information. I mean, if you've been on stage with a drummer ever in your life,
yeah,
you've been around some damaging stuff.
Yep.
As much as I love drums and drummers,
of course,
but those cymbals will do a number on you if you're not careful. And just modern life too,
Mm-hmm.
Living in a city, it's like if, I used to live in New York too. And just walking down the street, you're hit with a lot of stuff. So anyway, I like to be careful with my ears, and I used to mix a lot more in headphones. I used to really like mixing in headphones, and I still use headphones for some things to, especially for like panning things and just getting a sense of balance between the two, the two sides of the stereo field. But I don't live in headphones as much as I used to.
Of course.
Because I want to be careful with my ears. And,
nice.
And I also try to mix pretty quietly. And that's something I started doing maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. Just being conscious of not turning the speakers up too loud when I'm mixing, so that I can work for longer. And I'm not getting fooled by just the excitement of something being loud,
Right.
Another thing that I have started to do more is when I am mixing or just listening back, even if we're just in tracking mode. But when listening back to takes or listening back to mixes, turning off the computer monitor, and just listening, because you know how it is. It's like you go into a studio and you play the track back for people to like, to get some feedback, and everybody's staring at the screen.
Right.
Including me. It's like, what are we looking at?
Totally.
And we're just looking at waveforms going by. And something about that visual input, I think, colors the way you're listening.
Yep.
And I have found it really valuable to just turn the monitor off, so that you're just experiencing the listening.
Yeah.
And I found that really helpful, and that's something that I do suggest to people to try, and see how it changes. See how it changes the way you're hearing your own work.
I love that. That's such a great tip. And I know this is totally different, but like I try to do that in my own little world, even just with like phone calls, and I mean, and I don't even mean to like look at the monitor because you're getting distracted by whatever, emails or whatever. But it's like, even though I'm in Brooklyn and New York City, I have a lot of green and a lot of trees at my window. And that's what I like looking at when I'm on the phone. I don't want to be distracted by this like digital thing on my eyes. It's like I want to listen to the person. I want to connect with the person. So I totally get that.
Yeah, yeah. I think what pointed me towards that was I have a friend, a great producer and musician named Brad Jones here in Nashville, and and I remember going over to work at his studio, Alex the Great, one day, and looking at the screen in the Pro Tools session, he had all the tracks, the color of all the tracks turned to black. All the waveforms were black. Usually in a session, the different tracks have different colors, and it's a very colorful scene. And I asked him why he did that, and he said, "Well, I don't want to be influenced by a color that I like or dislike. I don't want that influencing the way I feel about a part or a track when I'm working on it." And I was like, that is so interesting, like just getting that influence out of the work experience. And I think that's what pointed me towards, well, why don't I just turn this off?
Yeah.
As often as I can.
Exactly. What are some thoughts on microphones? There's obviously quite a range there, and obviously it depends on what you're trying to do. But
oh yeah. I mean, I love microphones, and I have, I've invested some dollars over the years in some really good microphones. So that's a hard one, because a lot of my favorite microphones are very expensive. I mean, that's just the way it is. I have some real classic, some classic ones here that I kind of lean on. But I think that, really, of all these mics that I have, not that I have like a super grand collection, but I have some great ones. But I probably of the couple of dozen microphones that I have, there's really only two that I really use, because they work for everything. And I think that's kind of the thing. I don't think you don't have to have a ton of stuff. You just have to have one or two that you love and that you know how to work with. If you find something that really turns you on, just get to know it, and return to it so that you can get that relationship with it. I mean, I think having like one, having one condenser mic, kind of like large diaphragm condenser for that sort of something that would be classic, thought of as a classic vocal mic, is always good to have around. And then also like, a good dynamic mic, like an SM57. I mean, SM57s, they cost $75 and they work on a lot of things, a great vocal mic that doesn't cost that much money is a Shure SM7. And I mean, that's like I want to say it's like a $200 or $250 mic. And, I mean, lots of classic vocals hit records and records that we all know and love have been recorded with that mic, and it's easy to get. So, I think if I have one here, I just keep it like close to my computer so that, if I want to, if I have an idea for a background vocal while I'm mixing or, working, I can just kind of just turn right to it. And it always sounds great.
I love it. Give me your thoughts on mixing, which I know is a very, very large topic in and of itself. Like, should people be mixing themselves, or what should they be looking for in a mix engineer?
That is a really big topic. Should they be mixing themselves? Well, that's a tough one because I mix myself, but I don't always think it's the best idea. And I think there is something really valuable in getting an outside perspective, getting some outside ears, because it's really easy to get, it's so easy to get attached to your demos and the way they sound and the way they feel, because, and there is something valuable in that, sometimes that is just the way it should be. Sometimes there's no way to separate the sort of inspiration and intention of a track from those first instincts, even if it's not a proper mix. There's some bad mixes out there that are classic hits. I mean, every once in a while I'll hear some stuff, and I'm like, wow, never realized that the tambourine was that loud in this Rolling Stones track or whatever. Right. But we accept it.
Yeah.
So yeah, this conversation can get pretty can converge into like psychology and philosophy and metaphysics, really. But I think it is valuable if you can, if you don't feel comfortable mixing your own stuff, to find somebody that you trust and really like working with, because that's so much of it. It's just the confidence in what you're doing, and and what the intention of it is.
Absolutely. Mastering. There's obviously a wide range of options there. What are your thoughts on mastering? And again, another fairly big topic.
Well, mastering is kind of a, there's kind of a dark science to mastering that I don't totally understand, and I kind of like to stay away from, because like early on when I was really first starting to produce records and mix records, I wanted to attend the mastering session, and I did attend the mastering session for a couple of things that I did. But they would always end up getting adjusted after anyway, And I kind of started to wonder if my presence at the mastering session had something to do with that. Like maybe it wasn't valuable for me to be there,
Right.
So now I really prefer not to, and just because it is that final step, and I like, and also I think for me it's also kind of a first step in letting it go. Okay, it's like I have to let this go at some point.
Right.
I have to stop micromanaging this at some point. It's going to get released, so I have to let it go. So in a way, for me, like letting it go from my producer mind, mix mind, to an outside set of ears is kind of it's kind of the first step into that, and it's nice to hear it come back, and hopefully be, the hope is that you're going to get surprised at how good it sounds. And, um, and I have a few mastering engineers that I work with. I know I know a few great mastering people that I trust and I have good communication with. And I think that's really important too, is to work with a mastering person that you can communicate with, that you can say,
Mm-hmm.
what you like, or, if something's, maybe not exactly what you want, that you feel, that you have an open line of communication with, and that we'll listen to, and we'll listen to your, we'll listen to your thoughts, and also not be too possessive,
Right.
So.
Exactly. And this is kind of there's blurred lines in this, but do you have any thoughts on like a home studio versus a traditional studio? I mean, you're at home right now in your studio.
Yeah, I think both situations are are valuable to the musical ecosystem. I mean, I'm just thinking about like where I live in Nashville. There's a home studio, and on every third house has a home studio here, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some there was an ongoing fight for the last several years, because there's some not to get too detailed about it, but there were some coding issues with having a home studio in Nashville, Tennessee, where
Wow.
technically on paper it was illegal to have a home studio here.
Amazing.
It's like, really, if you shut down all the home studios in Nashville, there'd basically be no records to listen to.
Correct.
For a few years.
Yeah.
Of a certain genre. So, and it was really just kind of carryover from from attitudes from decades ago, when maybe there was some tension between the professional studio owners,
Right.
not wanting to lose their clientele. But I mean, we're in a situation now where there's just not that many artists that can afford,
right,
that they just don't have the budgets to be able to go to a proper studio and spend between $500 and $2,000 a day.
Totally.
A day.
Yep.
So even the professional studios now realize the value of the home studios, because the home studios give artists and give projects a place to develop and get started, and actually gives them business, because records now are made in a combination of those two settings. I mean, not all records, but a lot of, even major label records and records with a budget are still made with, in a conversation between the professional places to track. And then they always get, they usually get taken to a smaller room, like where I am, to do, vocals or touch-ups, or, additional overdubs and that kind of thing. So, I think, we have some great studios here in Nashville, and I do get kind of wistful when I do find myself in one of those classic rooms, with, incredible gear and techs that are on staff, and the gear is kept up really well, and the room is designed and, just sounds wonderful just to be in the room itself, and all those things coming together. I mean, that is a great experience. And, I do get sad thinking about, the fact that there's a whole generation of artists and musicians that might not ever get to experience making a record that way.
Yeah.
but it's just not the reality of it's just not the reality of our times, and it's not necessary either. It's not necessary to have all those things to make interesting music.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful when when those things come together and you can be in that setting and all the pieces come together. The material is good. The musicians are good. The gear is good. The room is good. There's something like super magical about that experience. So I love it. I love when that happens. I got to work with my good buddy Jonathan Wilson on a record that came out earlier this year. Unfortunately, right as it was released right as the pandemic was beginning, so
right.
It was a tough thing. But we made the record last year, and the majority of the recording was done at a studio here in Nashville called Sound Emporium, and it's a classic. It's a classic studio.
Yeah.
And we put together a band of like incredible musicians from around Nashville, and Jonathan brought some friends of his from LA, and it was wonderful, to like be on the floor doing live performances with a large ensemble, and fantastic. But there were also elements of the record that were also done in smaller rooms as well. So yeah, I think they're both important, and I like the interchange between the two.
Yeah.
The two settings.
Agreed. That makes a lot of sense. And I do, before people can afford Sound Emporium, I do want to offer a few options on some of the things we talked about. For digital audio workstations, Reaper does have a $60 entry level DAW. So if you're just getting going or figuring this stuff out, that's obviously very reasonable. And then as far as a recording interface go, I mean, you talked about Universal Audio Apollo Twin. That's definitely on the higher end. But Scarlett Solo or Focusrite Scarlett Solo also makes one for like 110. So.
Oh yeah. I've been working on some recordings by a woman here in Nashville that's been using one. She has one of those at home, and she records her stuff with that, and then sends it to me, and then I work with it here, and the track and everything she sends me sounds great, so that's the thing. It's like, she's making super interesting and cool sounding stuff with $100 worth of gear.
Exactly. But you said you use Pro Tools and not Ableton, is that how you pronounce it? Ableton. I don't have the book in front of me, but it's like, Pro Tools isn't the most expensive one either, right? So it's like, whatever's the right fit for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, if you can just, if you have ideas and if you have musical ideas and you have a microphone, a decent microphone and some kind of way to get audio into your, if you're using a computer, get it into a computer, then you're good. You're good. And there's, and take it from there. I mean, you can either keep it in that world and or not, or at least you've got the raw materials to get, to send to other people to embellish on it.
Exactly.
There's just so many ways to do this now. There's just so many ways to do this now, and it can be overwhelming. But I think for the younger generation, of artists, I mean, my sense is that it's more liberating than anything else. It's more liberating than overwhelming.
Right. Absolutely. So, last night we talked a little bit about, maybe it was a utopian idea of kind of creating a sanctuary while recording. I mean, do you ever, I'm sure you do, but do you ever engage with people on social media when you're in the studio? I mean, and again, every situation is different, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would like, I don't always like announce it, but unless it ends up being a problem, but I like to, you know, I would prefer there to be like no, uh, I kind of dream about a no smartphone rule
Yeah,
when you're actually working on stuff,
absolutely.
just because it's I prefer to be working in an environment where we're all really present, where we're
Hmm.
all really in it. And, it does kind of bug me if I'm like intensely like working on something, a part or editing something or trying to really, get to the heart of something. And then I look over at the artist or whoever I'm collaborating with and they're like on their iPhone, like,
Totally.
texting or something,
Yeah.
or, or a vocalist. I'm trying to talk to a vocalist in the vocal booth and they're not responding to me. And I just know they're texting somebody. So
Totally.
that kind of that, I would love to like maybe have like a box, like a put your iPhone here, you know, before you come into
I love
the
it.
control room or so yeah, that's I think just the record making and collaborating and being in that I like thinking of it as being like in a kind of a elevated, you know, uh, a place of elevated consciousness. I guess
Hmm.
it's like a very fortunate place to be. It's like we're all here doing, making some art. Let's really be in it. And
Exactly.
we don't have to like. We don't have to do an Instagram story every time we're doing a guitar part. It's like
Yes.
let's make some music. But I'm an old fogey, so
No,
that's
I'm with you in
um,
on so many ways, or in so many ways on that.
yeah.
Um, you are also a visual artist, so this does not seem to be an issue for you. But I've definitely worked with many established artists where it's not their first rodeo, and I'm reminding them throughout the recording process, like gently, like, "Hey, just want to put artwork in the back of your brain." Um, so when do you think about artwork? For a release.
Well, that depends. I mean, there sometimes, it's kind of there, early on, and sometimes it's like extremely last minute. So I don't really have a formula for that. But of course, it's such a, I, it's probably always there. At least, there's always a tone or a a sensibility or a tone, in my mind. I mean, I'm just talking about my own music right now.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I love the visual arts, so I always want it to be, I always want that to really feel right. Um, and like, well, I remember working on the last Autumn Defense album that we made. Um, I had taken some photographs of something that I thought was going to be the cover of the album,
Hmm.
and it just and so those photographs were kind of hanging around, as we were finishing up the record, but it just something didn't feel right. It just was like, I don't love this. It works, but I just don't really love it.
Right.
Um, and I felt like I'd kind of forced it because we didn't really have anything, and um, and so that was kind of a last minute thing. I ended up remembering that I had bought this box of slides of found photographs by this photographer who I didn't know who he was. It was just kind of bought it on a whim. It was like a box of like 5,000 slides from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And And kind of in the 11th hour, I remembered that I had that box in a closet. I was like, oh yeah, I wonder if there's anything interesting in there. I guess maybe that's a place I could start. And I borrowed a slide projector from a friend and started looking at the slides. And I ended up not leaving my apartment for the entire weekend and just diving into this person's work and this person's eye. And it immediately just felt perfectly attached to the music for some weird reason. It was, it was so lucky.
Yeah.
And, for some reason, like the sort of the themes of the songs and the tone of the recordings and the tone of these photographs just fit perfectly. So I'm really glad that I didn't force my own photographs onto this record, and I listened to myself, listen to that feeling that it just wasn't quite right. And I ended up getting surprised. So, yeah, I think just, I just like to have that feeling that the two things are really connected.
Right.
And like this single that I'm putting out pretty soon is kind of a similar thing in that I have, these two songs that I'm about to release are like, 20 years old. And I didn't know what I was going to use for the imagery to accompany it. I mean, that's kind of a high pressure thing, to have all this music from a different version of myself from years ago.
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to come, I don't want to put a picture of me, like, just that didn't feel right. And I just happened to come across some work by a young artist that I found on Instagram, actually. And the tone of her work just was sort of like looked exactly what I've kind of always imagined I wanted the visual element for this music to be, but I just had never found.
Right.
So that was a really nice surprise too.
And it worked out.
It did, and I contacted her, and she was super, super excited to be a part of it. So, sometimes, sometimes things come quickly, and sometimes it takes 20 years to to find these relationships.
Exactly. A few more questions. Thank you for bearing with me.
Yeah.
The next chapter is about distribution, which I feel like for the most part in the modern era, you've always kind of you've worked with people on that, but you had some really hands-on experience distributing your book.
Yeah, well, I just that was something I had never done before, and I was a little intimidated by the idea of it. But I made this photography book. I had released it 10 years ago, and I wouldn't say when I did it 10 years ago that it was really had any distribution other than just personal connections. Like it was in a few bookstores by just people that I knew, that I just called them up and said, "Hey, I made this book. Would you take some copies?" And they did. And this really great photography bookstore in Santa Fe somehow got wind of it, and they asked for a few copies. So it was all very, very, kind of, it was very hands-on, personal, cottage industry.
Mm-hmm.
So when I decided to redo the book, I kind of, do a reprint of the book 10 years later. I wanted to, wasn't sure how I was going to handle that, but I decided to keep it, kind of in a similar way and do it in-house. And I basically just, through Squarespace, I just set up a Squarespace website for it, which was super easy. And Squarespace has very kind of intuitive. You can do like a store You can do the commerce stuff that you can do through their site is like really easy to set up. I mean, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
I feel the same way. That's how I sell my books.
Yeah. I mean, it's like so easy. You just you set up your bank account through their platform, and people can pay through a credit card, and you can set up all the shipping stuff. It was super easy, and yeah, I set that up. I did a few Instagram posts like announcing the book and what it was, and did some pre-orders because I was on the fence about even doing the book in the first place because it was right at the top beginning of the pandemic, and I didn't know if people wanted to spend money. People,
Sure.
People, including myself, were like really freaked out about where this was going, and so I almost pulled the plug on it. But actually, the printer, the manufacturer, suggested doing a pre-order campaign. And I'm glad they did, because that's what I did. And I ended up selling enough books to basically pay for the manufacturing of the book within the first week and a half or something.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then once the books arrived, I mean, I had to do the work of actually, wrapping them up, boxing them up. I became pretty acquainted with the UPS website.
I'm sure.
And how to get that. But, once I got a flow going, I was like, oh yeah, this is very doable.
Yep.
This is very doable. I mean, if I was selling, thousands upon thousands of books, it would be a different situation. But for doing something, a personal project like this, I really enjoyed that part of it. Actually, I really enjoyed like seeing the orders come in, seeing who they were coming from, where they were coming from.
Exactly.
Sending thank you emails, and it was really pretty satisfying.
Well, and I highlight that because like that, to me, that kind of defines building a sustainable career, because you just said it, who those people are, right? So you can communicate with them in the future about books, about music, about shows. And, I mean, historically in the modern era, like we as musicians and music industry people, I mean, let me back up. I've said this on almost every episode, but, tech companies are the most valuable companies in the world because they have all of our data. And as musicians and music industry people, we have no problem just giving that data to Spotify, iTunes, MySpace before that, right? So to me, building a sustainable music career is collecting email addresses, collecting mobile phone numbers, and also knowing where fans are, which obviously is crucial for a touring strategy. But I also think there's creative thessings you can do in pandemic times with that. And you also referenced something that I did on my book, which is we essentially, because I also did a pre-order, and we essentially recouped before release. And I think that's a model that on one hand, people are definitely doing in music, but I think it's something we need to like talk more about and like use that phrase or something, because, I still, and so do you, like, we know artists that I get it, just everything goes on the credit card of the label. And then suddenly, it's like, whoa, I'm $100,000 unrecouped. And, so it's like, let's start thinking about like what we're spending and start monetizing. I know it's kind of a dirty word, but like monetizing the music from day one. And that's what I talk about. Like, whether it's through a pre-order, if you have a clear vision, like I'm making an album or an opera or a single or whatever, or like start a Patreon if you're entering the studio and you don't know what your project is. There's people want to support artists, and so let them. Don't just be, I mean, I get it. It's like, here's my masterpiece, here we go. But you just said it. You paid for 100 Polaroids before it was out, and so did I with this book. So I think that's an approach, people do, take in music, but we should talk about it more.
Well, it can be so overwhelming. I mean, the thought, like it can be scary. It's like, because it's expensive to make a book. It was expensive to make the kind of book that I made, to make an to make an art book and to make it something that I would be proud of and not cut corners. And the whole point is to put something out there that you feel really good about, but the expenses start to rack up, and all of a sudden, you look at you look at what you're spending. So, but I think, but that idea that, what was really encouraging, or just, just a really nice thing to know about this experience, was just seeing that people want to participate in culture.
Yeah.
And so, like you say, like, let them, give them an opportunity to. And that's the whole reason that I decided to do this single as well. It's like, okay, well, I'm not gonna, I don't necessarily need to try to set the world on fire with this, but I like this thing that I did.
Yeah.
I feel like I want it. I feel like there are some people out there that might dig it, and why not let them? Why not give them the opportunity to?
Exactly.
And do it in a way that create an object, that is something that if I was curious and an artist, an object that I would like to have, so yeah, and it can, it doesn't have, every project doesn't have, like I say, like my dad has a quote that I really like, where he says, and it's a way of trying to encourage me to not overthink things. Every song you write doesn't have to be Rhapsody in Blue.
Nice.
And I think that's just a good all around philosophy.
I love that. Another kind of dirty word here. Does the word marketing mean anything to you, or what does the word marketing mean to you?
Well, it does sound kind of dirty, but but it's got to happen. I mean, gotta pay for these books. Gotta pay for this single. And I certainly am not an authority on how to do it and do it well, which is why I like to work with people that know more about it than I do, or at least get the input of people that know more about it than I do, like you.
Thank you.
But I think it's like what we were talking about earlier. And like in working with you, that's what I expressed to you. Like, I want to promote this project, but here are some parameters.
Yeah.
Like, this is the way I want it to be presented, and there's going to be ways that I don't want it to be presented. And there's so it's kind of part of the, having it be tied to the creative, to the art itself, and the tone of the art itself, I think is important to think about. It's like not trying to what's the expression? Not trying to fit a round peg into a square, a square peg into a round hole. It's like, you don't want to make a piece of art or music or something that has a specific tone, and then promote it in a sort of a opposite, with sort of an opposite voice.
Yep.
So, but sometimes, the artists themselves can't really can't micromanage that.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can. Some artists are really, really good at it, and if you're good at it, then you should make the most of that skill. But there's nothing wrong in asking for help too.
Of course.
If it's not your nature.
Well, and what you're talking about here again is authenticity.
Yes.
And because if if it was like, if you do these 5 or 10 things, you know, like you're going to have a hit song, or or X, Y, and Z is going to happen, everyone would do those 5 or 10 things, you know? So again, it's about authenticity and listening, you know, to that intuition. I interviewed Zoe Keating for the foreword of this book probably about a year ago, but I turned it into a podcast episode as well. I asked her to write the foreword. She's a single mom, just really, really busy, a widowed mom. And I said, you know, why don't I just interview you and I'll transcribe it and turn it into a foreword. And that was really effective. But anyway, I said to her, I asked her the same question, you know, what does marketing mean to you? Or do you think about marketing? And she's like, I don't. I really don't. And then I just had to rephrase the question. I'm like, what do you do after you put out a release? She's like, oh yeah, I guess I tweet about it. She has literally a million Twitter followers. So yeah, it's just interesting. It's a dirty word, but we all do it in our own way. And I think, again, the people that are authentic about it and are just trying to connect with other humans, even in a weird digital world and in an even weirder pandemic world,
right.
that, you know, that's what's effective, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's all about intention too.
Yes.
And, you know, kind of, you know, I was just reading, there's a filmmaker that I'm reading a book of his about film, and kind of about like sort of his feelings about film and the way he makes films. And he's an artist who his films are only accessible if you watch the 16 millimeter prints of them. Like you can't, they're not on YouTube, they're not on a website. He doesn't digitize them. The only way that you can see them is to, you know, somehow be in a situation where you're at an event where they're projected.
Wow.
Or, you know, like, I guess, you know, galleries or, you know, cinemas or stuff, or, you know, can rent them, you know, set up performances of them, but that's the only way that you can experience them. And, it's, you know, there's part of that that's like so fascinating to me, you know, because it makes it an event. It makes an experience, you know, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating to read about. I love the purity of that. I love the, but it also, you know, makes it a very kind of rarefied thing. And, you know, there's not that many people that will ever have that experience. So, but he's cool with that, you know. You know, it's kind of part of the art itself.
Yep.
So, you know, but it's about the intention, you know. He's not looking for, you know, wide acclaim or, you know, he wants people to, you know, he wants the audience to have a very specific experience.
Yeah.
So there's something really admirable about that, but also, you know, you know, like for the work that I do, I don't necessarily want to ram it down people's throats, but I also don't want to keep it a secret.
Of course. Yeah. It's a balance for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
His name is Nathaniel Dorsky,
nice.
By the way. If anyone is interested in checking out his ideas, and
love that.
He wrote a really beautiful book called Devotional Cinema.
Oh, amazing! Very cool. I really do just have a few more. We're almost done going through your career through the lens of the book. The next chapter is about sustainable touring. And obviously no one's touring right now. So any thoughts on webcasting or some sort of hybrid model for the future post-vaccine? And maybe, I mean, I almost feel weird asking this, but you're such a road dog. I mean, are you enjoying a little bit of time off the road?
I am enjoying time off the road.
Yeah,
I am.
I understand.
I think, you know, it's, you know, I think, I think this is probably the case. I was just texting with a friend of mine last night who also is a performer and has, spent a lot of time on the road over the last 5, 6, 10 years. And, she agreed with, we were both kind of on the same page with that, we didn't really know how much we needed the break.
Yeah.
It's come at, it'd be great to not have all this suffering, and anxiety and the horrific situation that brought that about, of course, without saying. But if there's anything valuable about, there's certainly things that are valuable about having to take a pause, and kind of look inward and take stock of what it is that we all, have been doing, and looking at why we do it, what we like about doing it, what is maybe not super positive about, aspects of how we, participate in it.
Totally.
So I think it's been very, for me, that part of it has been very illuminating.
Yeah.
And I think we're all sort of like not wrestling, but we're kind of feeling and looking at the fact that we might not return to, we're probably not going to return to the way things were.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not the worst thing.
Totally.
There's hopefully the transformation will. Hopefully we can turn this moment into a transformation. It's going to be painful. It is painful. It's going to be painful. The things that we're losing, venues that we're losing. Every time I see an article about a venue that I love, or that's either in trouble or is closing, and you think, God, I'll never be able to be there again. And that's like really watching all this stuff kind of fall away is tough.
Of course.
But who knows? Like who knows what it's going to, transform into. And maybe there's going to be a new kind of depth to the way that we distribute our ideas and our culture.
I think there will be. I mean, I obviously agree with everything you just said, but if we move to a hybrid model where it's a sold out show, but then, and I was just talking to the CEO of Mandolin, which is a webcasting company today, about that. Like, you can then webcast to more people further. And she was pointing out you can also geo-target people, right? So, if they don't live in that city or whatever. But, and I know this is probably like a smaller category, but I've heard a lot of good things, from like stay-at-home parents who are like, oh, I can never go to shows, and now I can sit on the couch and watch this amazing performance. And I'm not saying, again, it's not ideal for the artists. Like we all miss live shows, and same with, people who are disabled, if they might not be able to get to a show. So it actually has opened up, the avenues of live performance to people who might not have had access otherwise.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I haven't really thought of it that way, but yeah, I mean, there's certainly not a lack of performance to enjoy, right now. I mean, I haven't been really doing it, but there's so many people in my world that are doing it, and doing it really creatively and really well, and it's inspiring, and it's kept a lot of it's helped keep a lot of people's heads above water during all this.
Agreed, definitely. I'll just ask a quick question about merch. Do you have any thoughts on merch? I feel like we kind of touched on this. Not that your book is merch, but that's certainly an extension of you. I mean, and again, like, you produce projects, you have your own projects, like, any thoughts on merch in general?
Yeah, I mean, I like things, I like design, and I like, um, objects, objects d'art, it's like, I think, I like the tangible, I, that's why when, like, just going back to the single that I'm doing and that you're helping me with, it's like, I didn't want it to just be a digital file. I wanted it to
Right.
be an object,
Mm-hmm.
and, I mean, you know, there's always the argument. It's like, do we need more stuff? Do any of us need more stuff? Do we need more stuff in the world? I don't know. That's getting a little, that's getting, that's maybe a bigger question, but, but I think it's, as far as like the relationship between artists and their fans, I think it's a way that fans like to participate in the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
with the artists, um, whether it's a t-shirt, something as like, something as, sort of basic as a t-shirt, or, like, people are getting like super creative with merch stuff these days, and I love it, um,
I
yeah.
agree. So the last chapter of the book is actually the first chapter of Don Passman's book, which you probably know, like Don Passman's famous "All You Need to Know About the
Mm-hmm.
Music Business." He's kindly been a podcast guest and gave me a blurb on this book, but that kind of fascinates me because his book was initially written or it came out in 1991, so it was probably written in 1990 or whatever. So yeah, so the first chapter of his book is like how to build an industry team, and mine is, when do I need an attorney, a business manager, and or a manager, defining an artist traditional team. So, which makes sense to me, right? Because in the pre-digital era, like, you had to assemble these people so you could get a recording contract and all that stuff. And I'm trying to say, like, here's all the stuff you can do on your own until you probably can't handle it anymore. And then, what does that mean? Because so many artists are like, oh, if I can just get this agent or this publicist or whatever. And actually all the artists I've talked to, this question's been interesting, but you do a lot of things on your own. You also work with me. You also work with Wilco's management. You have a great attorney, so maybe talk about some of the team members you have to kind of enlighten. Because again, I think there's just this stereotype of like, oh, I'm just going to get this team and then I don't have to do anything, but you do both really well.
Yeah, I mean, I've got, I have people in my world that I really like working with, and that I trust, and that know me and know my sensibilities, and and part of that just comes from having worked with them for a number of years, yeah, I mean, there are times when there are like, certain, there are certain situations where I feel like I can sort of deal with the nuts and bolts of it myself. If there aren't too many nuts and bolts, maybe a nut and a bolt, but but if there are multiple nuts and bolts, then I need to, I need to get, I need to call on my people like you, or my attorney here in Nashville that has helped me with things for a long time, and I just recently started working with a new publishing admin, which has been cool, that you helped hook me up with, that and that's something that I would not have been able to investigate and dive into without your help. So there are there are situations when I need I need that assistance,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think having a team is, like you say, the concept of it can seem like super overwhelming and a grand thing, but it's really just relationships,
Yep.
It's relationships, and it's like, it's It's people that you like to engage in work with, just like you would, like, putting a band together or putting a group of musicians together for a certain album. It's like, okay, we're going to make this record and it's going to be this kind of vibe. So I know the people that I want to work with on this,
Yep.
And that's kind of the way I think I think that's the way I've sort of approached finding the people that I like to work with on my creative endeavors.
That's such a great point, and I've never heard it described that way. I love that.
I have my moments,
Very cool. Well, final question. We made it. That was like way longer than I told you it would be. So thank you.
Oh, I've been yapping, going on and on. So
no, it's great. What does building a sustainable music career mean to you?
Well, it means being able to keep doing the things that I love to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the way that I want to live my life, to have creativity be, an essential part of my, of my daily, weekly, yearly, existence,
Mm-hmm.
So, so that's what it means to me, having it facilitate, me being able to approach my life the way that I enjoy.
I totally agree. That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Pat. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thanks for all that you helped me do.
It's my pleasure, and I learn a ton from working with you. So it's truly a gift.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, that is a wrap for this episode of How to Build a Sustainable Music Career and Collect All Revenue Streams. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you on the next episode.